This is the Screen Addicts podcast, and I am your host, Cinema Steven Sosa. And unfortunately, TV Viegas will not be joining me this week as he is a very, very busy man traveling with his football team, with his son's football team, and all of his cooking. I mean, he's just a busy, busy guy. But I also would like to apologize for the last few weeks of not being on the episodes or not releasing any episodes. I've actually been on vacation for 2 weeks in Texas. And what's funny is that I was actually there and I hung out with Chris, TV Viegas himself. And we always talk about doing episodes together live, like recording a live episode together. And then by the time we settle down from whatever it is we're all doing and hanging out with our other buddies, it never really manifests itself. And we just kind of just decide not to do it. We'd rather hang out because, we can record while I'm in Florida and he can record while he's in Texas. So we just figure that time's better spent doing other things. But I told him, I was like, man, it's been a couple of weeks since we've released an episode. So I definitely need to put one out there, especially this week, because this week is a huge week. This is the release of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, I don't know if I can really say long awaited sequel to the original, because I don't think people were really anticipating a sequel to this movie until it was announced. Once it was announced that there was going to be a sequel with everybody coming back, Michael Keaton, Tim Burton, Winona Ryder, I think that's what really got people excited about the prospect of this sequel. And so now that it's here, it's been released. I saw it last night and I am going to be reviewing that movie, non spoilers, of course, because as of today, I don't think anybody's really had much of an opportunity to see the movie unless you went a little bit early. So I'm going to do a mini non-spoiler review of that movie. But what that really was going to do is drive me to the main plot, the main topic of the week. And it made me think about Tim Burton movies altogether. And Tim Burton's had a decades long history of creating films, producing films. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to rank his top 10 favorite, not his favorite, my favorite top 10 Tim Burton movies. And now these are the movies that he's directed now, because there's been a bunch that he's produced, he's written the stories for, and stuff like that. But these are just the ones that he's directed. So I wanted to stick with that list. But before then, I also told Chris, I was like, dude, it's been a couple of weeks and I have a lot of stuff that I have watched and I would like to share because I haven't been able to talk to you or anybody about it. And again, we've had a lot of downloads in our absence. So even though we weren't releasing new episodes, people were still downloading the episodes. And I don't know if it's just new listeners or people going back and listening to older episodes, but whatever it may be, we really appreciate all of the listens that we've been getting. It's been nice to have loyal listeners, especially after doing this for so long. We reached our 8th year and it's just exciting to do it. And, it's easy to talk about movies. I could talk about movies all day, so no problem there. But what I'm going to do is, since it's just me, I get to reopen the Cinema Steve store. Steve's video store is open because anytime I'm recording by myself, I call my recently watched list Steve's video store. So come on in. Okay. So, a couple things here that I wanted to talk about. And the majority of, well, no, I guess it's kind of a mix of old and new. Well, for example, there was this new movie that I watched on demand called In a Violent Nature. Now, this is the best way to describe this movie is if A24 directed Friday the 13th. It's a very experimental, perspective switching not serial killer movie, but monster serial killer type movie. And basically, it's if you take in the perspective of Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers. And what's funny about that is that there's a lot of walking and a lot of nothing happening, but it builds up to him walking up to somebody, killing him in the most brutal of fashions. So if you like indie experimental movies, I highly recommend In a Violent Nature. Our friends of the podcast, the Dead Body Bathtub, did a complete review of this episode. So I figured I shared my opinions, or they shared my opinions. So if you want to hear a movie like this being fully reviewed, I highly recommend you seek out the episode by Dead Body Bathtub. It's the In a Violent Nature episode. Really good stuff. I got, for the first time ever, Death to Smoochie. Now, I doubt people might remember this movie. It came out in '02. It has Robin Williams, Edward Norton, Danny DeVito. Danny DeVito wrote the movie. Basically, it's like the dark underbelly of children's daytime programming. And I remembered in '02 just laughing my ass off about this movie because it's funny. And for the first time, it was just released on Blu-ray. I can't believe that this movie had never had an upconverted print, especially since it's a Warner Brothers movie. Like, that just kind of blows my mind. You'd think that any mainstream studio would release any of their big movies, especially with something with Robin Williams in it. But Death to Smoochie is a very dark comedy. It's still, I would say, semi holds up. It's still funny. A lot of the parts are kind of, ooh, that doesn't hold up very well today. But overall, it's a nice little black comedy that you really don't get to see made anymore, and it's the type of movies that my son or daughter will watch with me that was made over 20 years ago, and they would ask, "Wow, how did this get made?" And I said, "Well, because they didn't give a damn about stuff like that back in the day, and it's just if you have a sense of humor about things, it's pretty funny. If you get offended by a lot of stuff, I highly recommend you do not watch Death to Smoochie, but either way, I think with the Blu-ray cut that it's gonna be uploaded to HBO Max. So be looking out for it to come out to HBO Max if it's not already there. It might already be there, but I didn't check because I was waiting for the Blu-ray release. And a couple things that I saw at the movie theater. Oh boy, I saw for the second time in my life a 40X picture. And the first one that I saw in 40X was a couple of years ago when the Batman came out with Robert Pattinson. And I had already seen the Batman, and I remembered I was in Atlanta, Georgia working. So then I remembered them saying, "Oh, there's a 40X theater." It wasn't as common as they are now. And I know a lot of places and territories and areas still don't have 40X theaters, but I remembered a couple of years ago when the Batman was out that this theater in Atlanta had one. So I said, "Oh, I always hear a lot of things about the 40X theater." And being a big fan of Kevin Smith and his podcast, he's always talking about 40X. So I said, "Okay, well, I've got to go check out the Batman." And for 3 hours getting rattled in your seat, it's not the best thing. And a couple of scenes work for it, but I find it more distracting than anything else. But my son Connor, we saw Twisters a couple of weeks ago, and it was just the 2D version. And after watching it, I said, I think we really missed an opportunity to really capture the 40X experience, because I think something like Twisters would really encapsulate the theory behind the entertainment value of 40X. So when we tried to go see it initially, all of the screens were sold out. So we had no opportunity to see it. He was bummed out, and I felt kind of bad that we didn't just do it anyway. But that problem, we missed the boat. But luckily, this last week they re-released some more screenings of it because people were still wanting to see tickets for Twisters and 40X. So luckily, we got to go see Twisters, second time in the movie theater, but the first time for him for 40X. And I've got to tell you, some things come off as a gimmick, some things don't really work on me, and some things come off more distracting. I am a film purist. I like to watch nothing but the screen and the beautiful surround sound. Thank you, Dolby Digital. But this 40X experience, I have to say, was pretty fun. I was even saying, I was kind of snobbish about it. I said, I don't think that this is gonna be that great. It might be more annoying or distracting. No, I felt like I was in a damn tornado in that movie because it was rocking and rolling you. I thought I was going to flip out of the chair like some kind of ejecto seat or something. But overall, it was great. It was a fun time. If you have a 40X theater and they're showing Twisters, Twisters is definitely made for 40X because they have like all these effects, like the water spritzing on you, the winds blowing, like they have these fans blowing in there. It was pretty fun. I will say that much. But and Twisters is such a good movie. I really enjoyed it. I had no problem seeing it again in theaters. And so yeah, I would definitely recommend the Twisters 40X experience. Now, one movie I do not recommend is The Crow. This is the remake of the 1994 Brandon Lee Alex Proyas directed film, cult classic, iconic, much beloved, much fan favored film, The Crow. Now, this sequel, oh my God, it was I'm just gonna go ahead and say this. I watch everything. I'm Cinema Steven, and that is the hill that I will stand on. I will watch anything ever made. There is nothing that you can tell me. And most people will balk at watching some things. They're like, I'm not gonna watch that. That looks stupid. No, I'm not gonna ever watch that. It doesn't matter to me. If it looks stupid, I might actually want to watch it. I watch a lot of dumb stuff, but there's not a single movie made that I do not want to watch. I will watch everything and anything ever made. And this one is definitely one that falls into that category. I said, the reviews for it's got such horrible reviews, fans and critics. So I said, okay, this is just a basically universally hated film. So I've got to see it. I definitely have to see what's going on with this movie. And I it wasn't good. It just wasn't that good. And I like Bill Skarsgård. I think he's a really good actor. I think the choices that he's made as Pennywise, Barbarian, Boy Kills World. Boy Kills World is a movie similar to The Crow in the sense that he is a guy brought up and he wants revenge for those have done injustices towards him. I highly recommend Boy Kills World. I definitely don't recommend The Crow. Everything about it was so different from anything that you knew before. And you know what? You shouldn't base it on the 94 movie. I said, okay, fine. I'll base it on the James O'Barr graphic novel. At least pay respect to the origins of this character. And it differentiated from that so much. It was so weird. And I think the most egregious part of this movie was the fact that you don't even see him turn into the Crow until, I kid you not, 40 minutes. I was keeping time. I was like, why is he still not the Crow? What is going on here? Because they want to pay more focus on the love story aspect, which is not great. They have zero chemistry together. I guess the FKA Twigs, the singer, plays Shelley Webster, his love interest, and they're both brutally murdered. I don't know. It was really weird. I think one aspect of it that I did like was that there is a supernatural twist to the villain, because I said that makes sense. If a guy can come back from the dead, by the help of some kind of mystical crow, there's got to be other kind of supernatural entities in this world. And the villain, played by Danny Houston, had supernatural abilities, but we don't really know how he got them or what his motivations for them. But I said, well, at least he's got some kind of powers, because that would make sense in this type of world. But yeah, the crow was just, it was really bad. And then the thing that I liked about the original was the fact that he's only basically killing bad people, and he's killing the people that did him wrong, with the exception of that scene with the samurai sword in the nightclub. But that was just cool. But in the Crow, he's killing everybody. I'm like, dude, do you even know he might have a family? He might have somebody at home waiting for him. Maybe he's going to turn into a crow and then come kill you, because you're just killing everybody. So that makes no sense. But I do not recommend you watch The Crow in theaters. If you have some kind of morbid curiosity about it, like I did, I would definitely wait for you to watch it at home when it comes to streaming, because based on the box office results, it's it was a disaster, and so it'll probably be coming to streaming pretty quick. And it's kind of the shade that the original director Alex Proyas threw about it was pretty damn funny. He was what was the quote? He said, at first, I thought the Crow reboot was going to be a cash grab, but as it turns out, there wasn't much cash to grab. It's kind of like such a dad joke, but I was like, damn, that was a kind of a sick burn. But it's just one of those things where if you're going to remake something, at least have, I mean, don't remake it. I'm more about sequelizing things. I don't really care for straight reboots of something, because it's not about so much the character. Like Brandon Lee is the Crow. That's why none of the other sequels that came out after Brandon Lee's version, City of Angels, Salvation, Wicked Prayer, none of those movies were any good, because they just weren't good. That's why I didn't have such a huge problem with this one. But I did have a problem with the fact that it was Eric Draven. All those other Crow characters had different names, so it was almost like different stories. And I would have much preferred that route with it, but they decided to use Eric Draven's name, and I said, nah, that sucks. What I personally would have done is I would have taken Sarah, the little girl from the first one, have her grown up. She's a woman, she's getting married, and maybe she and her fiance get killed, and then she's the Crow. How about a girl Crow? I think that would be kind of cool and different, and still pays homage. Like, hey, maybe Eric Draven was the one that gave her the Crow abilities, or sent the Crow for her to help. I don't know, something different. But yeah, definitely don't go see the Crow if you. Yeah, I mean, go see what you want, but damn, that was a rough one. Now, unlike The Crow, this one was probably one of my favorite movies of the year, and that is Alien Romulus. This is the newest film in the Alien franchise, directed by a personal favorite of mine, Fede Alvarez. And respect to the Latinos, baby, let's do it. I am all for this. So he directed the Evil Dead remake from 2013, which is great. He also did Don't Breathe, which came out a few years later, which is also great. So anything that this guy is doing, he's on my radar. I want to see everything that he makes. And the fact that he was doing an Alien movie was really exciting. And I don't want to give too many spoilers away about this movie, but I will say that it was so good. I think the entire cast was great. The actor playing Adam, the robot in this particular movie, was fantastic. He made you believe any updates or any kind of signal diversions going on in his body. I felt like he was a real robot. It was really good. And Kaylee Spaney, who this is the second movie I've seen her in. She was in Civil War earlier this year, which she was good in that too. But she kind of takes over as the lead actress in this film. And it's just such a great movie. And something about Alien Romulus that I really loved was the tech. The tech looked like 80s tech, but it also looked kind of updated. So this kind of weird hybrid of 80s technology mixed with new and future technology. It was so brilliant. The production value of this movie was fantastic. I will say I did have a little bit of an issue because the lights came on in the theater in the last 15 minutes of the movie. So if you've seen the movie, you know how shitty that is, because that's the climax. Like, something big twist happens, and I was so upset. So they did a make good. So shout out to Regal Cinemas for doing the make good. Thank you for the free ticket. I appreciated it. I might actually go back and watch Alien Romulus again just so I can see that scene as it should have been. But again, I highly recommend Alien Romulus. And finally, at the theaters, here we are, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. And I'm going to say that I really enjoyed this movie. It wasn't great. Okay. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. And a movie like that, that's the best that you can actually hope for, is just that it pays enough homage to the original without being disrespectful. And it also just turns out to be a pretty decent movie. And it was. Now, this goes back to what I was saying about sequels and reboots. I would much prefer a sequel with Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder, Tim Burton coming back, and rather than doing a complete reboot of the character, having somebody else playing Beetlejuice, having somebody else directing this movie would be sacrilegious. And so I guess that it's better to have a sequel than to have a complete remake, which I'll stand by every single time, because sometimes it's not about the characters. Sometimes it's about the people that are playing the characters. I mean, who would they even cast to play Beetlejuice now? Like, I couldn't even fathom such a thing. And nobody would like it because nobody can do it as good as Michael Keaton as he did in this movie. And I will say, though, that some of the negative things that I was thinking about this film, and they're pretty minimal. I don't think that there's anything too overly bad about this movie, but I will say that there's a couple of characters in there that if you remove them from the movie completely, it would have no effect on anything going on with the storylines or anything like that. And I think that the movie was a little bit long, and I was worried because Michael Keaton had done an interview where he was saying he's in this movie the same amount of time as he was in the first one, which I can't believe that, because it seemed like he was in this movie far more than the original, which is great. So that actually turned out pretty well. But yeah, Winona Ryder, she was great. There's some scenes in there that kind of paid homage to the animated series. So if you watch the animated series in the 90s, you're going to be thrilled with some of the things happening there. I think that it was a nice mix of claymation and CGI and everything that Tim Burton was doing. And, another thing that I really liked about this movie was that it felt like old Tim Burton. And he was getting kind of gross and kind of macabre, which is what he's best at. And I think we've really distanced or he's really distanced himself from that type of storytelling, which is unfortunate because that's what brought him to the dance. And so I'd say if you're a fan of Beetlejuice, you will like the sequel. I think you will find a lot of Easter eggs in it that will make you feel more appreciative of it. There's a nice little twist with one of the side characters in the movie that I wasn't expecting. Wasn't necessary, but at least it was something different. And there was another thing that I was kind of wondering how they were going to handle the Jeffrey Jones situation, who plays the dad. And man, if you look up some of his crimes, it's pretty sick and deplorable human being. So I was kind of wondering how they were going to handle his character because he has such a pivotal part in this family. But I was also bummed to not see Adam and Barbara, played by Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis, and obviously with Alec Baldwin's curtain troubles, and I don't even think they had asked Gina Davis to come back. So, but they address it, and it's just a passing line. But overall, I recommend you see Beetlejuice. It was fun. It was about as best as you could hope for with this sequel. And I mean, maybe not the best you could hope for, but again, it was enjoyable. I might go see it again just because I have my Regal Unlimited pass. Shout out to Regal. They're not sponsors, but you should be, because I'm always hyping you up and I'm hyping up that monthly premium deal. And oh my God, I see so many movies there, and maybe I shouldn't say that because then they might revoke my membership thinking that I'm going to pay more or something. But again, with Regal, I get to go watch it for free. So I definitely might check it out again. But until then, I would definitely suggest you see Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. It's a fun little romp. And yeah, I highly recommend it. Now, I did watch a couple of TV shows. One, my sister in law Kelly came into town, and me, her, and my wife Sonia, we were trying to figure out what to watch. We're just sitting there on the couch, just late at night. We're like, well, you know what? These two like true crime and stuff. So I put on that Worst Roommate Ever, that Netflix series. Yeah, they ended up watching a couple episodes of that, but that's pretty good. And people that live with roommates, I mean, oh my God, it could be really bad out there. Personally, anybody I've ever lived with has always been a gem, and I've never had any issues quite like that before. So that's good. I'm very thankful to not ever be in consideration on that show. But yeah, Worst Roommate Ever. And we got a message from a listener, and I hope I'm saying his name right, but Nick Opaleski. I again apologize for butchering your name once or twice, but Nick wrote us and he said, "I'm requesting for you to review for me the Disney Channel game show that aired from July 26, 1998 to 1999, Mad Libs." And you know what? Once he said that, it just fired up some nostalgia for me because my God, I haven't seen that since I mean, it came out when I was in high school. So I was already kind of phasing out the Disney Channel stuff, but I remembered watching Mad Libs for a little bit. And what I didn't remember, I fired it up on YouTube because good old YouTube, man, they play everything from back in the day. And it's kind of crazy that Disney doesn't put on their old game shows. Nickelodeon, too, like Paramount Plus not putting on old Nickelodeon shows. Now, I could be wrong, but I think Double Dare and like Legends of the Hidden Temple have been on there before, but they're really missing out on putting on those old game shows. But I watched a couple of Mad Libs on YouTube, and man, it was just as I remembered. Basically, you have your Mad Libs. We would fill out those little books as kids, and I think they still have them. And fill in the blank with your words. And of course, we always would write dirty stuff because I mean that was just more fun. But obviously, they're not going to do that for the Disney Channel version. But yeah, that was a nice little blast from the past. So thick, it was just nice to see that again. But Nick, appreciate the email, and hopefully they'll stream Mad Libs for you because you could probably catch up on it too. But um oh, I have another shout out too, and it's to Thomas Mendel, who works at GameQuest there in Amarillo, Texas. This was actually pretty cool because, well, I left my debit card because I was buying some stuff at GameQuest there in Amarillo, Texas. It's pretty cool, and I forgot my debit card by mistake. But luckily, Chris and I and my mom and my son and his son, we were all having lunch, and he said, "Hey, let's wear our Screen Addicts shirts." I'm like, "All right, I brought it, so let's wear it." And luckily, our Screen Addicts t-shirts that you can purchase on tpublic.com, they were my saving grace because the guy Thomas wrote me on our Facebook page saying, "Hey, I just remembered you guys' shirts, and I looked you up on Facebook, and I just wanted to say that you forgot your debit card." And I was like, "Wow, that's totally cool." And so merchandising does help, and it also saves your bank account because what would have happened if I forgot my debit card in Texas? Like that would have been a disaster. So Thomas, I appreciate that, but I think we're gonna just go ahead. We're gonna bypass headlines here because we're going to get into the main topic, and that is Tim Burton's Hall of Fame. And this is, of course, my own personal list. And I know people will have different lists. Again, same movies, but probably different order. And I think that this will probably be switched around too, because I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't know if I'd put that there, but we're just going to go ahead. This is my first thoughts, my first just putting it together because I don't want to second guess or third guess or quadruple guess any of these lists. So whatever I wrote down, I just stuck with it, even if I may change my mind. But overall, I'm going to go ahead and knock out his honorable mentions that aren't on the top 10. But we had Corpse Bride, and that one I would say is kind of surprising. I really like Corpse Bride. Big Eyes, which is a really good movie with Amy Adams and Christoph Waltz. The Planet of the Apes remake in 2001. I enjoyed it, but yeah, it was quite lauded. A lot of people didn't really care for it. They definitely didn't take to it like this new line of Planet of the Apes movies. Dumbo, kind of forgot he did that. It's cute. Didn't dislike it, but it didn't feel much like Tim Burton. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children with Eva Green, that was pretty decent. Frank and Weenie, both his original 30-minute black and white film and his claymation film, that one was good. Alice in Wonderland and Into the Looking Glass, those two are probably his bottom rung films personally. Felt more like a cash grab to do those movies, especially the sequel. Like, and I remembered when Alice in Wonderland came out. I think it was like 2010, perhaps, maybe 2009. I'm not sure of the year, but when it came out, it had considered one of the worst conversions because this is like post Avatar, right? So a lot of these studios were trying to convert these already shot films into 3D because they're trying to cash in on that Avatar money. And what people didn't realize was like if you didn't shoot it in 3D, like James Cameron's 3D cameras were, it's not going to look right. So when you do a post conversion of 3D to an already shot film, it's going to look terrible. Same thing happened with Clash of the Titans that year. People were like, this looks terrible. It was giving people headaches. And Alice in Wonderland happened to fall into that category because Tim Burton didn't shoot it in 3D. He didn't care about 3D. He just wanted to make his movie. And so, yeah, that got kind of kind of botched. And people were like, "Oh, Johnny Depp's the Mad Hatter, of course he is." And I think by that time, even people were kind of tired of their collaborations and stuff. But if you like Alice in Wonderland, that's great. I personally didn't care for it. Oh, and I'm going to say right now, and this probably will surprise a lot of people, but The Nightmare Before Christmas is not on this list. And people are going to be like, "How? How is that not on the list?" And I said, "Well, because he didn't direct that movie. Henry Selick directed this movie. He also directed James and the Giant Peach. But a lot of people give Tim Burton credit for that film because it's Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Basically, he produced the movie and he wrote the original story for it. He didn't even write the script. Caroline Thompson, who wrote some of his other stuff, wrote this movie. So, hate to break it to you, but Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas is actually not a Tim Burton movie. And I know that sounds weird to say it, but it's true. So don't be surprised if it's not on the top 10. But here we go. Number 10, 1996. Mars Attacks. Now, this was a nice little throwback to the sci-fi schlock films that he grew up watching. And this movie has an all-star cast. And I mean, there were so many people in this that even Jack Nicholson was like, "Well, I'll play three characters in the movie." So um, it's just a nice throwback to science fiction movies. It didn't do too well at the box office. I think a lot of people were really put off by how bizarre it was and stuff like that. But, I still really enjoy Mars Attacks. I like its goofy schlockiness, and I like the visual effects, Michael J. Fox, and it's just a great cast. It's fun. If you like campy sci-fi movies, this is definitely the most big budgeted campy sci-fi movie you're ever going to see, and probably haven't seen since then. But yeah, number 10, Mars Attacks. Number 2, this is Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street from 2007. I know I was just kind of knocking the collaborations with Johnny Depp, and there's still a couple more on this list. But when they were at their peak together, they were fantastic together. And I think Sweeney Todd was probably the last time that him and Depp worked well together. And there was a lot of criticism because Depp really couldn't sing the character's parts, like from the Broadway perspective, but he made it his own in this movie. And I absolutely loved the visual effects. I loved Helena Bonham Carter, who was Tim Burton's wife at the time, as Mrs. Lovett. She was one of those actresses that got a lot of parts in his movies, and a lot of people couldn't really say, "Oh, it's because it's his wife." No, it's because Helena Bonham Carter is super talented. She's really good at what she did, and she's really great in this movie. And I think it got overlooked by a lot of awards consideration because it gets so dark. I mean, you're basically cooking and eating people in meat pie, so that's just typical for a Tim Burton type of movie. But again, the music was good, the cast was well done. Um, Alan Rickman is great as the evil Judge Turpin. I mean, just great cast. It's such a great movie. I think it's really, really underrated in terms of musicals. When people talk about musicals, they never really bring up Sweeney Todd, which is kind of sad because Sweeney Todd, in its own legacy, has been around for decades. And Angela Lansbury's version, I think it was the 80s, where she played Mrs. Lovett, is such a great, great movie. I've seen it on DVD because it was put on DVD. But yeah, if you like musicals and never have seen Sweeney Todd, well, I would recommend it because it's really good. It's really dark, but light at sometimes, I guess. I mean, it's a pretty down ending movie too. But yeah, number 9, Sweeney Todd. Number 8. Ooh, I think I'm gonna go with I think I'm gonna swap these two. So number 8 is actually gonna be Big Fish from 2003. Now, Big Fish was a movie that it really seemed like Tim Burton was really, really trying to make that Oscar run. He was thinking, this will probably be my best and only and possibly last chance to ever make a movie worthy of Academy Awards considerations, considering the people that were nominating those types of movies, because sci-fi horror never has, and hopefully I can't say never will be considered for for Academy Awards. I don't know why there's such a halt on nominating movies like that. But this was more of I guess you could say mainstream. It's the most mainstream type of movie that Tim Burton would do, even though there's still a lot of really weird things that take place, a lot of, fantasy elements to the movie. And it's got a great cast. I mean, I will say the one thing that he can get a cast of people to be in his movies. Like, there was no shortage of A-list or talented actors and actresses that said no to being in a Tim Burton movie. And, oh, I forgot an honorable mention, Dark Shadows. That was another one that Johnny Depp was in with him. And I don't know why that popped into my brain. I didn't put it on my list, but Dark Shadows, when we watched it originally, I was like, "Yeah, it was okay," but rewatching it, it gets better and better when you rewatch it, which is the remake of the old TV miniseries. But back to Big Fish. Big Fish had Ewan McGregor in it playing the younger version of Albert Finney, and Albert Finney's basically narrating his life to his son, played by Billy Crudup, and he's dying. So you don't really know which stories are true because he's always telling such lavish, elaborate, and fantasy stories to his family, and people are like, "Oh, okay, Dad, you're just kind of embellishing on the truth." And know if he does or if he doesn't, but either way, you're caught up in this story. It's a really good, heartwarming movie. There's a lot of light touches to it, and I loved Big Fish. I really did. It was good. I watched it with my dad. Both of us were kind of like, "Oh my god, I love you, Pop." He's like, "I love you, son." It's just kind of one of those weepers. But again, Big Fish, and based on the movies he's made since then, that definitely was his last shot at an Oscar. Because I think even he was like, "Ah, forget it. I'm never gonna win an Academy Award. I'm just gonna make movies that I like." And yeah, Big Fish, 2003, number 8, number 7. This probably would have been the time to talk about Dark Shadows, but Sleepy Hollow from 1999. Sleepy Hollow was written by Andrew Kevin Walker, who wrote Seven and in the Game, which is another Fincher movie. And I thought, oh my god, the writer of Seven is writing Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. This movie's going to be awesome, and it was. And then when it was rated R, I thought, holy crap, this is rated R. Like this is going to be brutal. And when you think about a headless horseman taking heads from his victims, it's not going to be tame. It's going to be pretty gory and gruesome, which is what this movie was. I think this is one of his, you know, hardest R-rated movies. And if I'm not mistaken, prior to another movie that I'm going to talk about, I think it was his first mainstream R-rated movie. I could be mistaken, of course, but he's not really known for his hard R-rated movies. And Sleepy Hollow was definitely that. It wasn't really, there was no sex or vulgar language or anything. It was just gory. It was just brutal. And even by today's standards, it's kind of tame. Like you could almost probably say it would fit for a PG-13 TV-14 type of crowd anyway. But back in 99, Sleepy Hollow was pretty eye rolling. But and it was a good movie. Loved the story. Christina Ricci, Johnny Depp, everybody oh man, of course all the people in this movie. You had Christopher Lee, Ian McDiarmid, you just had a whole list of people. Michael Gambon, who went on to play Dumbledore, just a whole bunch of people in this movie. It's just such a great story. It's a nice detective series too. Like there was a really great mystery to it, and the ending wasn't so clear cut, which I liked. I was like, oh, well, that was an interesting twist. But Sleepy Hollow, I think it's streaming on Paramount, was where I watched it last. But coming up to spooky season too, like pretty much all these movies would fit to watch during your Halloween season. And if you're anything like me and my family, we get started in September because there's just so many to watch that you don't really have time to watch everything in 1 month. So we get them going in September. But yeah, I think all of these movies would qualify. So number 6 is his theatrical debut as a director. He's not doing any more shorts. He's not doing any made-for-TV movies. This is his big first movie from Warner Brothers, and that is 1985's Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Now, growing up, I was a big fan of Pee-wee, and seeing this movie was great. A lot of people thought that he did Big Top Pee-wee 2, which was the sequel, but he didn't. And you can tell, like, there's something very unique and different about Big Adventure that it doesn't really look like anything else. And even the remake that Pee-wee did, or not the remake, but the sequel that he did a couple of years ago, was it like Great Holiday, Big Holiday, or something like that. It was pretty good too. But Big Adventure, there was something stylistically different about it. And when you're watching it, I mean, I didn't watch it when I was in 1985. I was a little older when I saw it, but you can really tell that this director is going to have a very unique perspective of things. And Pee-wee's going to look for his bike, goes all the way to the Alamo in San Antonio. I was like, oh, a movie in Texas. This is kind of cool. But if you haven't seen Pee-wee, I highly recommend you watch Big Adventure. It's a cult classic for a reason. It's so bizarre. It goes in places that you will never anticipate. It's so unpredictable. And it has the best use of the tequila song, tequila. And it's just so iconic in that sense. But Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Tim Burton's number 1, is my number 6. Moving on to number 5 is 1988's Beetlejuice, the movie that inspired the sequel that inspired this episode of the podcast. Now, Beetlejuice, really good stuff. Very, very Tim Burton. Like, I think this is almost peak Burton in the sense of what his style is and going to be because Big Adventure was good, but it wasn't until Beetlejuice that really solidified this director as somebody different and unique and showing something that hasn't been seen in theaters before, especially to mainstream audiences. Like this is, um, Tim Burton's been credited with creating goth culture in films, which I know that there's been horror movies and stuff way before Tim Burton stuff, but this was really jettisoning that type of movie into the mainstream. And Beetlejuice, it's fun, it's funny. Michael Keaton, who also would go on to collaborate with him a couple more times, it's a good fun movie. And rewatching it again for the billionth time before Beetlejuice, it holds up. I think it holds up very well. The effects are great. The practical effects, that's something that he's always been known to do, is the practical effects. And they hold up so well. The claymation, that's another thing that Tim Burton does very well, is his infusion of claymation into live action scenarios. And it's no wonder that he produces and writes and directs so many claymation movies, because that really seems to be his passion. Because even when he was younger, that's what he did. Like that's what the original Frankenweenie basically was. And just stuff like that. And I really, really love Beetlejuice. You're probably surprised it's not higher on this list, but it is what it is. So number 4 will be 1994's Ed Wood. Now, Ed Wood was actually a movie that was nominated for multiple Oscars, and it even gave Martin Landau his first and only Academy Award for playing Bela Lugosi. Now, Ed Wood is a notorious schlock filmmaker who really never made a good movie. Everything that he did was pretty much considered the next worst movie of all time. His types of movies are what pretty much inspired Tim Burton to make Mars Attacks. And everything going on in Ed Wood is so ridiculous. It's so over the top. It's shot in black and white to give it that old classic look, and which is a nice touch considering it's a mainstream film with all these A-list actors. It's kind of, I'm sure the studio was like, no, don't put it in black and white, but Burton has a vision, man. You got to stick with that vision. And Ed Wood, if you've never seen Ed Wood, I highly recommend you watch it, especially if you like movies, if you love movies, and if you love watching shows and movies about the making of movies. I highly recommend Ed Wood because there's a real sincerity to Ed Wood. Even though he's a really terrible filmmaker, he seemed passionate about what he was doing. He loved movies. He just wasn't good at conveying those type of visual imagery or good storytelling to movies. It's kind of like Tommy Wiseau in The Room. Like the guy loves movies, but he's just not good at making them. And Ed Wood is definitely a love letter to that type of person. And I guess that could work into many aspects of other things. Like you could be passionate about, football, but you're not going to go out there and be quarterback for any team. You can't do it, but you can love it. And it doesn't necessarily mean you should try out. But Ed Wood is a really funny movie. It's really good. And that is my number 4 movie. Now, number 3, it's Batman Returns from 1992. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and say number 2 is Batman from 1989. I know that seems kind of surprising, especially coming from me, huge Batman fan. I remembered seeing Batman, the original, at the movie theater with my dad. I was about 6 years old, and I never forgot it. It was probably the first movie, with the exception of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, that I can collectively recall in my mind, because a lot of it scared me. I was like, oh my God, that's scary. But it was so good. And I said, who's Batman? Who's Batman? My dad, he's he was in the comics. And then that set me off. I started reading all the old comics. I still read the comics, haven't stopped, and love the old Adam West TV show, because I was like, well, this Batman doesn't look like that Batman, but I still loved it. And it was interesting to note that Batman 89 was the first version of Batman that I ever saw, and it pretty much stuck with me. But, number 3, Batman Returns, was the sequel, obviously, and the last one that Tim Burton was going to do. And, it's funny because Tim Burton was actually going to do Batman Forever, but a lot of legal disputes, a lot of disputes with the advertising. And apparently, because Batman Returns was so gruesome and gory, that they didn't want him to come back because they couldn't merchandise their products. People were like, we're not selling this at McDonald's. Like, look at this movie. This guy's burnt to a crisp, and this penguin dude's spewing black blood all over the place. Like, it was a little too gruesome for people. And they were afraid that they were going to lose their licensing deal with McDonald's. So that's why they pretty much had him step aside as producer, and they brought in Joel Schumacher. But Batman Returns, it was the first look at Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman, and oh my goodness, and then again mentioned the Penguin. And I love Batman Returns. It's such a good movie. It's a Christmas movie set during Christmas, so you can watch it during Christmas. That's what we do, and I don't care. But yeah, so Batman Returns is number three. But back to number two, Batman 1989. Jack Nicholson is the Joker. Fantastic movie. The look, the sound. Having Prince scoring the movie, what an odd choice. And thinking about it now, I'm thinking how odd that is. But back then, when I was a little kid, I didn't know any different. I didn't even know who Prince was. I was 6. Like, I don't know who Prince. I didn't see Purple Rain. Nobody's letting me watch Purple Rain yet. But it was it was amazing. Everything about Batman was just so visceral, and I loved how strong he was. He was fighting the iconic Michael Keaton, "I'm Batman." Like, that still lives in the lexicon today, and people still consider Michael Keaton the best Batman. I always go back and forth, but I think every Batman or every actor who's played Batman has contributed something to that character that I have really enjoyed. Except for maybe Kilmer and Clooney, but I think even they brought something to it that potentially worked. But it was really Michael Keaton that really set the standard for how Batman was going to be forever. I know Adam West played him first, but it was really Michael Keaton that has solidified the Dark Knight, the black, the black and gold, all that stuff, and it's just such a crowning achievement. It was the highest grossing superhero movie of all time, and easily one of the highest grossing. No, it was the highest grossing in '89. And what's funny was like Tim Burton actually wanted to make a sequel to Beetlejuice after Batman, but they were like, "Are you kidding? This is the highest grossing superhero movie of all time. You're not going to make Beetlejuice Goes to Hawaii. You're going to be making Batman 2." And that's kind of what he did. But again, Batman, fantastic film, superb. It's on HBO Max. Watch it. Watch the original quadrilogy, even Batman and Robin. There's something that I think Schumacher does go off into kind of this like weird 80s, or I'm so sorry, weird Adam West version of the character. But, I find something to embrace from those two as well. But Batman 1989, fantastic movie, but it's not my number one. I decided to go with a movie that has stuck with me my entire life, one that I'll never forget seeing because it was just so unique and so original. And the reason why I think that this movie tops Batman is because, Batman was a pre existing character, somebody that's already been established, and you just tweaked it. I mean, yeah, he tweaked it a lot, but he still took something that was pre existing and made it his own. Whereas this character in this movie was 100% original, 100% creative, and that is Edward Scissorhands. Edward Scissorhands from 1990 was a movie that I remembered seeing with my mom during that Christmas, and then when I went to go visit my dad, I saw it again with him. And I kind of wonder what they thought about the movie. I think that my dad really took to it. My mom probably thought it was a little weird, but I know that I loved it. I loved how weird it looked. I loved the production value of it. And apparently, where my daughter lived in Lakeland, Florida, is where they filmed some of the shopping scene area where that big arch outside the buildings. Yeah, I didn't even know that, and I never even got to visit it, and I feel kind of foolish for not going. But Edward Scissorhands, such a great movie. Johnny Depp, in my opinion, that's his best performance. I know the guy's done a lot of stuff, but I really believe that he's this kind of android humanoid, and it's just such a Tim Burton thing. And Caroline Thompson, who actually wrote The Nightmare Before Christmas, The Black Stallion, I think she wrote a couple of other movies of his, wrote this one as well, based on his story. And it has everything. Another Christmas movie. It's set during Christmas too, well, at least the last half of it. But Winona Ryder in that movie as well is somebody that he's worked with multiple times and still continues to do so, obviously. But I loved her in that movie. I had such a big crush on her as a kid, still do. And yeah, I mean, like, still do in terms of Beetlejuice. Like, I thought she looked great now. I'm not saying, oh, but she's great in that movie. And I really believe their love for one another. It was just such a wholesome thing. And again, how it looks, the music, Danny Elfman. How have I gone this far without talking about Danny Elfman? Danny Elfman, from the Oingo Boingo band from the 80s, became his sound. What Tim Burton does with your eyes, Danny Elfman does to your ears. Because without Danny Elfman, I can't even say that some of these movies are as iconic as they are, because Danny Elfman scores, I think, like 80%, 85% of his movies. And every single one of his movies has such an iconic score, and each of them sound different. Batman, Beetlejuice, like you have a lot of really great themes that Danny Elfman conjured up. Hell, Danny Elfman wrote and sings as Jack Skellington in The Nightmare Before Christmas. He wrote the entire book, music and lyrics for that movie, and he's just his like right hand man. And I think that without Danny Elfman, I mean, my God, the layout of these movies could look completely different. And luckily for him. But there's a moment in Edward Scissorhands where he does the ice dance, and I absolutely love that scene where he's cutting the snow, what do you call it, the snow statue or whatever, and the music that's playing is just one of the most beautiful pieces of music. Yeah, I'm one of those people that listen to movie scores, don't care, but Ice Dance from Edward Scissorhands is just a beautiful composition of pure symphony. So I highly recommend you going to Spotify and listening to it. But yeah, that's and I'm gonna wrap that up. Edward Scissorhands, number one. Loved how it looked, loved how it sounded. Still haven't forgot it, and I won't ever forget it. And I don't think they're ever gonna make a sequel to that one, but it's not without the realm of possibility. But anyway, that's going to wrap us up. I thank you all for sticking around with me on this solo adventure of the Screen Addicts podcast. We will be back soon with new episodes. If you like this podcast, I highly recommend you listening to my other podcast, the Real Problems podcast. And on Real Problems, I basically just take one movie and discuss its troubled productions from everything and how it went down and how it didn't go down and stuff like that. And also follow TikTok because I'm actually posting a lot more shorts of real problems because it's easier to create one particular instance and discuss it that happened on a movie rather than doing anything else. So I highly recommend Real Problems. If you want to follow me on any of my socials, I'm at cinema_Steven. And that's pretty much linked up to Screen Addicts and Real Problems too. So if you find me there, you can find Screen Addicts. And again, go to our Facebook page where we have the Screen Addicts Fanatics. And on there, okay, that's going to pretty much do us for. Okay, that's going to do it for this week. And I would like to thank you all for sticking out with me and on this solo adventure of the Screen Addicts podcast. And we were going to sit out another week, but I was like, no, we got to talk about Tim Burton. We got to talk about Beetlejuice. It just has to happen. So, again, thank you all for listening. If you like this episode, I highly recommend you checking out Real Problems. That is my other podcast. And on that podcast, I talk about, I take movies that had troubled productions and list all of the things that happened on those productions, and it's going really well. I need to get more episodes out there. People are always like, when's the next one, when's the next one? And I do a lot of research on it, and I don't want to give out any false information, and I fact checked everything. So if I pick a movie, I need to just stick with it and do more and more. But it's pretty time consuming to do one of those episodes. So I appreciate all the listeners and downloads from that. um if you like Screen Addicts, I suggest you go to our Facebook page and you can friend us on there or like us on there. Follow the Screen Addicts Fanatics group page. A lot of people are sharing posts, trailers, memes, all that kind of stuff. It all pertains to movies and TV. And if you want to be part of a community like that, everybody there is great. I mean, look, Nick, thank you for writing there on a message on Facebook there, and we appreciate that. And so, yeah, if you want to rate us on Oh, you can rate us on Spotify too. Like, give us a nice little 5 stars on there. That helps us get listens more. And on iTunes, if you want to leave us a review, please do so. Leave a star rating. That's always helpful. And I think that's gonna do it for this week. We're gonna be back. A couple more episodes coming up. We'll be planning ahead, and we're gonna have some guests coming out too, because we always love our guests and we love people that interact with the show. And if you have a podcast that you want to share, let us know. We'll give you a shout out. No problems there. We all believe in the podcasting community. We don't talk about, or there's not a show that we won't talk about or anything like that. We're all in this together. And without further ado, thank you all for listening, and adios, amigos.